Hello, everybody. I'm Kathy Kuntz at Cool Choices. I'm delighted you could join me today to talk about culture change and more specifically about measuring culture change in our organizations and across our communities as part of sustainability efforts. So lots of you are familiar with us, but in case you aren't, Cool Choices is a nonprofit. We're based in snowy Madison, Wisconsin, and our quest is to inspire individuals, businesses, whole communities to adopt sustainable practices that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So really, our core business is culture change, thinking about how we help entities transform practices, small and large, across social constructs so that we're reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And culture change is a piece that I feel like is getting a bit more attention over time, in part because we're seeing more and more organizations take on really aggressive sustainability goals. The map on the left is from the Sierra Club. Their tracking of the communities, cities, states, counties that have committed to 100% clean energy. And you see that starting to, be pretty widespread across the country. The other thing I put up there was the new list from Barron's of the most sustainable companies. And partly why this caught my eye was there are some companies that really moved dramatically in this list from last year. And it speaks to just how much is going on in the sustainability space and the fact that more and more entities are adopting really aggressive goals and getting things done. And as all of you know, because you're sort of at the forefront of making this happen in your communities and organizations, initial efforts around sustainability where we're addressing kind of the low-hanging fruit, where maybe retrofitting lighting systems or getting a better recycling programs set up. There are a lot of really good successes in those early moments, and it feels like you can kind of leapfrog progress. As you get better and better at this, though, as you achieve more and more and your goals get bigger, it gets a lot more complicated. And maybe the best example that I can think of is around zero landfill. When organizations commit to zero landfill, there are usually a series of big wins early on where they figure out a strategy for doing something with a key kind of byproduct that they hadn't addressed before, whether that's about composting food or something else. They've got some success. But then really getting to zero landfill is about everybody making the right choice about waste all the time. And very often companies will say, well, the hardest part of this is our employee cafeteria. And it just reflects this sense that to get where we need to go on sustainability, to achieve really aggressive goals, it's not just about your amazing green team. Your amazing green team is super important, and they will always be kind of fundamental to this success. But ultimately, to get to really aggressive goals, you need all hands on deck. You need everybody doing their part around sustainability. You need everybody thinking about waste through a sustainability lens. You need everybody conscious of energy usage in the choices they're making all the time in the organization, or water usage, or, fleet practices. All of those things have to be part of what people do all the time. And that's why we talk about culture. I think one of the moments where this became most real for us early on was in one of our partnerships where a sustainability director talked about suddenly having an entire employee population moving in the same direction. People understood what mattered, they understood why it mattered, and they were collaborating to achieve that. That's what we want for all of you. We want all of you to have that. And I think our quest today is to really talk about how do we measure that. I want to make one other kind of meta point about culture before we talk about measurement, and that's to really distinguish culture from strategy. I think I always think about Peter Drucker's quote on this, and the point he's making is that in every organization there are strategic priorities that come and go. In some of the organizations we've worked with, people call those the flavor of the month. That there's a new executive who's really excited about XYZ, so now everyone's got to frame what they're doing in terms of XYZ. But in a year, we won't even talk about that anymore. That will be over. That is not the path for sustainability. I think part of what it's important for sustainability professionals to recognize, though, is that up front, rank and file staff don't know if sustainability is a flavor of the month or really going to be something cultural. And your quest is to make it cultural, to go, no, this isn't something we're doing because we've got one person in a job versus another and we're going to stop doing it in a year. This is about us transforming how we do our business, how we live in our community permanently. This is culture, not strategy. And maybe the best example of kind of that distinction in the corporate world is the transformation that's happened around safety. Probably all of you are familiar with organizations who have a really strong safety culture. They might have protocols that happen every time a meeting starts. They might have daily practices. There's certainly reporting outcomes around safety. There is a way that in an organization where safety is really part of the culture, people intervene with each other when something might not be safe. There's a kind of group collective that we are achieving. Our goal is no accidents, and these are the ways that we practice toward that goal. And that's really, I think, a model for us to aspire to in the sustainability world. In a similar way, you want people going about their daily work tasks or living in their community and having a lens around sustainability, making good choices all the time. One more kind of way to think about this that I think is useful is Seth Godin's. He talks a lot. He's a marketing guy, and he talks about kind of building communities, he often calls them tribes. But he has this catchphrase that I think is really exactly what we're aspiring to here. People like us do things like this. I want you to kind of roll that in your head a little bit. People like us do things like this. People like us don't leave our computers on. People like us don't idle vehicles. People like us practice waste management in these ways. That it's that in the same way that safety would be, people like us don't leave ladders unattended, don't let there be puddles of water on the floor, etc., kind of thing. So it's that what ultimately we're talking about here is you want sustainability to be the new normal. And I think one of the challenges is, whereas in the safety universe, there's a pretty clear metric about success. This is about, have there been accidents or have there not been accidents or injuries? It gets a lot more complicated in sustainability to measure where your culture's at. And so we really want to talk today about kind of some measurements, because as you think about, yes, our quest has to integrate culture change here. We need to have people in our organization say, people like us, people who work here, people who are part of this community do things like this. They recycle. They opt for active transit when it's available. They reduce unnecessary energy load. So the question is, how do we know how we're doing? I said earlier, culture is really kind of what people say and do, how they think and act. And so, that gives us a little clue into, okay, how could we measure this? And I think one of the first ways we often think about measuring this, and certainly we do a little bit of this, is we ask people to tell us what they kind of say about themselves. What do you think this is important? Do you recycle? Are you doing these things? And the trick about this is, of course, what people say and what they do can be really different. When we're asked about our own practices, we tend to respond with a kind of idealized version of ourselves. The pie chart on the right is from a national survey asking people how their household energy usage compared to similar homes in their neighborhood. So people just like them. And what you see is only 9% of us thought our usage was higher than people just like us. Everybody else is using the same energy as everyone else, or they're using less energy. So we all tend to think we're doing really well in this. So there's a limit to what you can get from asking people, how are you doing? So, for example, if you're trying to make zero landfill part of your corporate culture, asking people if they're good recyclers is probably not going to help you assess where you are. Now, certainly the understanding what people do is important, and I think a core to all of this is watching what's happening in your real data. Are recycling rates up? Is energy consumption per square foot down? Are we seeing less plug load or more plug load? That raw data can be very useful. And I think sometimes it can give insights into culture or not, though I would caution you that we're human beings and we're biologically programmed to be better at seeing negative data than positive data. And if you think about that, there's like good evolutionary reasons for that. This isn't about whether I'm an optimist or a pessimist or a nice person. Okay, you're all nice people. But when you look out at the landscape, you are more likely to see the folks who are doing things wrong than the people who are doing things right. So when you survey the landscape to see, well, how many people are shutting off their computer monitors at night, I want you to be really conscious of not just counting how many people left them on, but also how many people turned them off. And most important is tracking the growth of that number of people who did it right, not the reduction of the number who did it wrong. And I know it at first glance seems like, Kathy, those are the two sides of the same coin. Why does it matter? And it matters because it's really, culture change is very probably the hardest thing you will try to achieve as a sustainability lead. If you focus on the negative data in this, it will inevitably make you cynical about what progress can be made. It's just really important that you focus on how many people are doing what we want them to do and how do we grow that number. It's just a healthier orientation. That said, doing this in an observational way can be pretty resource intense. Although I think it's useful to do periodically. I would encourage you to have maybe every quarter you walk through a particular area of the organization and just count. Okay, how many people are doing the thing we want them to do, and how many people aren't on this random day when I checked on this, and how is that number changing over time? As a way to get toward that, a little slide order thing here. But another way to measure this, though, and I think a more powerful way, and I'll show you some data about how we use this, is to get a sense of how people are talking to each other. So you certainly want to understand what they're doing, and you can observe some of that. but you also want to know if they're talking to each other about these things. And that's really important because human beings are social creatures. And we talk about the things that matter to us. So if I'm excited about the organization's efforts around sustainability, if I feel like my own commitment to sustainability is valued here, it's likely I'm going to have conversations about sustainability with my peers. And more conversations signals to more people that sustainability is important. It becomes this self-reinforcing kind of circle that's really powerful. So how we get around this is when we implement programs somewhere, we typically, in a baseline survey and in a post-program survey, ask people how often they talked about sustainability. So this is some sample data from a program. And in this case, you see 20% of the baseline respondents said that they talked at least weekly about sustainability. Now, that includes some people who said they talked daily and some people who said they talked, once a week. That number goes up to 45% in the post-program survey. So it more than doubles. And that's a really important signal to us. Okay, that's what we want. The beginning of culture change is that people are talking about this with each other. That means it's a topic that's safe to talk about, because if I am unlikely to bring up topics that it feels like if I talk about this, people are going to think I'm a weirdo. So it's safe. That I'm doing it at least weekly over a period of time suggests I'm getting some reinforcement for that. This is just really good data. We're also looking at where else they're talking about those things, because we want them to have more conversations about this everywhere in their lives. So the first piece is just, are they talking about it? But then, we really want to know a little bit more about content there. And where we've come down on this is trying to understand what people believe about others. And we ended up where we are on this particular metric because our very first program 8.5 years ago, we did a baseline survey, and the data sort of really stood out to us. So in this particular organization, more than 90% of employees took the baseline survey. So it was largely a census. We had a pretty good read on everyone in the organization. And we asked them if sustainability was important to them. And more than 3/4 of that population, so more than 3/4 of the organization, said sustainability mattered to them personally. Those folks also, 92% of them, said it was important to leadership at their organization, probably because they'd been harangued a little to do this survey. We got 95% participation. So these folks believed leadership really cared about this, and 3/4 of them said, this is important to me. When we asked them, though, if it was important to their colleagues, just 45% of them thought their colleagues thought it was important. And that gap really startled us. I remember being in a meeting there with a chunk of their employees and talking about how each of them in the room very likely had this commitment to sustainability, but they thought most of the people around them did not. And that's a problem. We don't act on our beliefs when we're in a situation where we think there's some jeopardy to acting on our beliefs. So getting your arms around kind of what people believe other people think about sustainability is really important. And again, so the way we do this is we do a sustainability is important question on a strongly disagree to strongly agree metric. And what you see here is just the folks who agreed or strongly agreed. This is a paired analysis, which means the same people are in the pre-survey and the post-survey in this case. So it's an identical group. And what you see here is first relative to their friends. So in the pre-survey, 50% of them said their friends, that sustainability was important to their friends. And in the post-survey, that goes up to 70%. There is a huge amount of difference between 50% and 70%. In a situation where I think maybe my friends care, maybe they don't, I'm unlikely to talk about these things. Where I feel pretty confident my friends care about sustainability, I'm much more likely to talk about things, and talking about things helps us identify the shared values that get us to act together. So similarly, here you see a kind of similar thing here on the coworkers, that it was a little bit over half and it goes a little over 70% believing that they care about these things. And, really, questions like this become foundational to assessing culture change. Are we a place where we believe that people like us do things like this? To be a place where you believe people like us do things like this, you need to have these numbers, upwards of 60% at a minimum. And I think, 70% is way better. Of folks thinking, yes, the people around me care about these things. So that's some of the ways we're measuring culture change. I'm going to open it up now to questions, because it's always good to kind of get your thoughts on some of this. So to submit a question, you've got that GoToWebinar sidebar. You can just type in questions there. And there is one. So I'm sorry, I'll read or interpret, but not both simultaneously. I'm presuming that the sustainability team has some ability to do company-wide surveys, but in our organization, that's not possible. We don't have access to surveys like that. Which I think is not an uncommon thing. So I've sort of 2 points here. First, I would suggest you might have opportunities to get some of this data from groups in informal settings. So you might be meeting with a team or a department, and you could ask people sort of, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is sustainability to you? Using that same scale, what score would you give leadership in our organization? And then what score would you give your colleagues? Those 3 numbers, write them down, pass them up kind of thing. You can do something really quick in a room to get a little bit of data. That's my least preferred method. I think the better opportunity would be that there's some, if you can't do a survey, it's probably because someone else is already doing a periodic survey of employees. And given that you have aggressive corporate sustainability goals and you need to achieve culture change, you should be in a dialogue with that group. They should be in a dialogue with you about what questions help you measure that. I think this is really, there's an opportunity there. And it's a particularly good opportunity right now because we're in a tight labor market. Those HR or lifelong learning folks who are doing those surveys are really concerned about employee engagement and morale and retention, and asking questions about sustainability there's good data that correlates to retention and engagement. So having a couple of questions that help you assess where are people's heads on this. Do they believe that they have a role in the corporate sustainability program? Do they believe that this is something that it's a shared value? Or is it just a green team that's in charge of this and everybody else is off the hook? So getting some of those broad questions. And again, I think if you started out just asking people how often they talk about these things and whether they think other people think it's important, you get a lot of insights. You can build on that over time to go deeper, to understand kind of where particular opportunities might be. So that is probably my big suggestion, that you work with that group, help them understand how important understanding where folks are on sustainability is, and get those questions integrated in. That's also another way to signal that this matters. You know, short-term strategies don't get reflected in those documents. Corporate culture does. And so, you know, engaging them in helping you create that corporate culture is just a good strategy in a broader way. And the survey might be the first opportunity to do that. With that, I'm not seeing more questions. My email is on the PowerPoint, though. Certainly, if you think of something later, I like to keep these short because you're all incredibly busy doing fabulous work, and I want to help you get back to it with some new thoughts about how you do it even more effectively. Thanks so much for all you do. Thanks for joining me today, and have a terrific rest of your day. Bye, guys.